Welcome to Developing Leadership the Genuine Contact Way, where we're focused on nourishing a culture of leadership by applying timeless principles of life to the art of leadership. In each episode, we explore one key principle. We'll share our own wisdom and insights and invite you to consider your own experiences in life and business so far and how you want to further develop your leadership with this theme. Our theme this week is empowerment. I'm Rachel Bolton, and I'm here with Birgit Williams. To feel empowered is to have mind, heart, and action in alignment with each other. We want to offer you as a consideration about being empowered today that we really believe that I can only empower myself. You can only empower yourself. No one can empower me. It's a misunderstood concept that any one of us can empower another person.
Let's look at this idea of empowering oneself from that perspective of mind, heart, and action in alignment. No one else can bring your mind, your heart, and your action into alignment except for yourself. So that's an easy way to remember about empowerment coming from the self. As I bring my mind, my heart, and my action into alignment, I am empowering myself. No one can empower me except for me.
This is one of those things that I see a lot in coaching and consulting development, and the people saying, "Oh, I empower people to do this," or "I empower organizations to do that," and it actually is one of my biggest pet peeves because I feel like every time I see that, I think about how it feels like they're in fact taking the power away from the person or organization that they're best trying to support. And thinking about it from that way, it brings to mind a question for any one of us as a leader, which is if this version of empowerment that we're suggesting for consideration today is true, if I cannot empower the people that I would like to empower, then what can I do? My skillfulness as a leader must lie in creating conditions for people to empower themselves. I might be skillful at creating conditions for people to empower themselves, and yet they do not do so. So it's another way of thinking about that need to swoop in and empower or rescue somehow, because it might feel like a failure of my leadership skills with empowerment. Is it, in fact, a failure? If you study people and increase your awareness, you'll notice that what often is happening is that people are habitually giving their power away to things, to ideas, to other people, to their fears. Their power stops where their fear begins.
Wow, their power stops where their fear begins. That's quite a sentence, and it's worthy of taking a pause and thinking about that for each of us. Where does my power stop? Where does my fear begin? What I'm thinking about here for leadership is what you have said, Rachel, about creating the conditions for people to claim their power. What a wonderful conversation for a leadership team to have with each other. How do we create the conditions for empowerment? Are we creating the conditions for empowerment? And what actions can we take if we really want our people to feel empowered? What can we do? What actions can we take? Because if our minds, our hearts are in alignment with wanting people to be empowered, what is the right action for us in leadership to be taking? And so the container, the creating the conditions for people to claim their empowerment, to work on their empowerment. And I loved how you put in that second part, which is, yeah, what if all that's in place really well done, and yet people aren't claiming their power? What's going on? And I liked that you talked about, well, there's these habits that people have of of giving away their power to, you said, ideas or other people. Um, so there is a second part of the activity that needs to be undertaken, which has something to do with helping people in an organization discuss and look at the topic of power and what would they feel like if they were claiming their personal power and choosing empowerment.
My mind is starting to think about this whole idea of creating the conditions for people to claim their empowerment, and how there aren't that many places really where people might feel like that's really a true and authentic thing. So as a leader, what a great opportunity, but also responsibility it is to create the space, and also somehow the encouragement that, like, yes, this is real. And yes, you can learn how to claim that power here, because often it's a lifelong history of giving up on that power to other people, to social pressures as a teen, to wanting to please your parents as a child, to all of those things, to really being able to step fully into your own power is quite a gift. So, we want to offer you some leadership skillfulness tips for working with empowerment, for working with empowering self and creating the conditions for others to also take that up. To create those conditions, we are recommending a couple of things for consideration for you. First, as a leader, to pay attention to the amount of authority that a person needs to accomplish their responsibilities and to make it so. To then pay attention to our own often unconscious habits where we might step in and interfere. It might feel like stepping in and helping, and that in fact that what you're stepping into is interfering with that authority that you've given a person to accomplish their responsibilities. The third is to consider creating an operating matrix for the organization that supports people being empowered in their jobs, in the way meetings are carried out, in the ways people can use their creative energy. This is about creating an operating matrix that develops the conditions for people to claim their power. Fourth is to practice listening with empathetic listening skills. These are the skills of letting a person know that they have been heard and understood. It does not always have to mean that you agree with them. And finally, in this little list that is actually quite big as I continue to talk about it, is to notice how you are acknowledging people, how you are communicating with them. A tip here is to pay attention to shifting your communication to I messages rather than you messages as much as possible. And that one might come as a bit of a surprise, because sometimes we want to focus in our empowering on reflecting back to a person the things about them, but really claiming your own power in those I messages can be a quite extraordinary experience.
It can feel a little bit scary for a formal leader or formal leadership team to think about, do I want to make sure that the authority to accomplish responsibilities is with the person that needs to accomplish those responsibilities? I know this in my years of consulting. The number one request that I've had from people who are coming into being my client or saying, well, my people don't carry out their responsibilities. They don't take sufficient responsibility. So that is a complaint. That is also an opportunity. And so I would get into conversations with that client to say, so let me look at the job descriptions, the position descriptions with you, because I'm looking for something in particular. And I'd say, aha, you have responsibilities. You might have accountability. Where is the statement of authority that you are giving to that person to actually step up, empower themselves, themselves and take responsibility. And that statement of authority or conveying that authority was almost always missing. And so I would talk with those leaders, with those clients, and say, so tell me about your fears in doing so. And there was always a great many fears that I would talk about. And if you did align authority with the accomplishment of responsibilities, what would happen in your organization? And 100% of the time, the answer was that the organization would be more adaptive, more productive. It would get more accomplished. There would be less conflict. There were just so many positive things said. So, as you're each thinking about this, do take a moment to think about what it would be like to overcome your fears and allow for an empowered workforce and allow for having authority to accomplish responsibilities with the people that you are asking to be responsible.
As we're talking about this word authority, I know from my own experience that often it's a word that people even have some confusion over. Like, well, if I know how they're being held accountable and I know what their responsibilities are, what is this authority thing? And I like to think of it mostly as, can they actually make the decisions to get the job done that you're holding them responsible to fulfill? Or will they continually need to be seeking permission somewhere? So it might be authority to make financial decisions, to make purchases on behalf of the organization. It might be authority to delegate work or to make strategic decisions or many other things. But ultimately, it's about, do I have to stop my work in the day to be able to seek someone's permission to keep doing next steps? And so for me, that's a simple way of thinking about authority, uh, in looking at it, particularly in relationship to those job descriptions. How do people actually enact their work? I'm working with an organization right now where almost every decision has to go in front of the executive level people for their final decision making before it can be moved forward. And those executive level people also don't participate in the development. They just get the brief and here's the decision we're recommending. And how much extra time and how much extra work goes into everything they do because of the need for this. And the more that we look at this authority piece, the more that they're getting clear about how they can shift that decision making and what needs to be in place so that the right kinds of decisions get made.
What about authority to be creative and authority to be innovative, authority to think outside of the box? Those are all important as well. And all of those, most companies, most businesses, most organizations that we work with crave greater creativity and innovation. And it needs to be built in. And it is very much tied to the conditions for empowering people.
Absolutely. So, as you're working on each of these pieces for your own organization, there is, of course, the work that we each need to do it for ourselves in that mind, heart, action alignment and in strengthening our own empowerment so that we are best ready to be able to create the conditions for empowerment in our organizations. And so we want to look at a couple of steps that we're recommending for strengthening your capacity for working with empowerment. And the first one is about empowering yourself. The biggest learning you may go through is to expand your capacity to be present to and to work with people who are empowered. The feeling initially can be one of feeling that you don't have control anymore and you don't know what empowered people are going to be doing next. So, continually working at empowering yourself is a great way to work with the uncomfortability of that. In order to have the capacity to be present to empowered people, we are suggesting that you work to keep your mind, heart, and actions in alignment. And I might even add, for people who have that kind of awareness, is like that also, like in your body, how does it feel? The mind, heart, body, and action all feeling like they are in alignment with one another, and to be aware of your fears, knowing that in order for your power to be in a flow, you might need to face some of those fears, maybe only one at a time, and doing whatever you need to do to move through that fear. The second tip that we want to offer you is to make a plan for how you will engage with people who are empowered. And that we are suggesting is to start by writing a really long narrative, a story of some sort in your journal about your thoughts of what this might be like and about what you know of your own habits that can usurp empowerment in yourself and in others. And then to go through that narrative and identify any themes that might be there. Try to distill those just into a couple of sentences. And then from there, when you have those themes, to uh, make a list of agreements that you want to make with yourself about how you want to show up in your own empowerment and in the ways that you want to create conditions for others to empower themselves.
An example of usurping empowerment in self and others is the need to help, like to step in to help when help isn't requested, because you want to be helpful. And that might appear as a generous and positive thing to do. And yet, that might be one of the themes that's playing out in yourself regarding how you might usurp empowerment in yourself and others. And so, an agreement with yourself, if that's one of the themes that's operating in you, an agreement with yourself could well be to wait, to agree that you will wait to help until you are requested to help by the person who is tasked with something. And so it's simple. And step by step, one after another, you can do simple things with what we're outlining here, and slowly empower yourself, slowly engage with empowered people in ways that are very fruitful.
I was thinking that, like, that really great example of only stepping in when someone requests help. It's a great one to practice with any little kids that might be in your life, because it's so easy to help them doing something as they're struggling to manage new skills. And so it's such a rich fodder, a rich practice ground for us as adults to be working on our own and not stepping in, and even being able to say things out loud, which we might not say to adults as we're practicing this, of like, I'm right here and I'll help you if you need it. And
Mm-hmm.
then sitting and waiting. It would be maybe a bit weird or uncomfortable to say that to another grown human, but to say it to a small child so that you're reinforcing it for yourself can be a really helpful thing if you happen to have any little people around you. I was also thinking about this one about being aware of your fears and working on them one at a time to do whatever you need to do to move through that fear. And the name of it is escaping me right now, but there's a really great TED talk about fear setting, much like we do goal setting, and kind of imagining like all the worst case scenarios, and then uh, being able to either first come to terms with like maybe it's not as bad as I'm imagining, but secondly to work on fears by addressing any of the outlying conditions um, that we might be able to handle, so that what emerges is generally very easy. So as we identify our fears, that having like if you're afraid, say, that somebody in being empowered is going to make a wrong financial decision for your company, well, what's the decision making matrix? What are the guidelines around how money gets spent and how purchases happen? If those are clear, then you can trust people to mostly make very good decisions that are within the scope of that. So it's a simple example, but if you're really wondering about how you might work through those fears, as you notice the uncomfortability and the letting go of control or letting go of those usurping moments, it can be a really great technique for working with that.
Very much so. In looking at, here's my fear, there's something about when that fear gets raised into my awareness, it already loses some of its power just
Mm-hmm.
by naming it. And then, okay, what can I do to reduce that fear and create a workable plan that doesn't end up taking away from my desire for people to empower themselves? And you gave a great example. And it's like, okay, I can set parameters around the decision making. And then beyond that, trust the person to do the right thing. So that's an example of working through that fear that is very productive and it has fruitful outcomes.
So in a few short slides, in a few short little steps, we have given you a lot of homework to consider as you work around this, the invitation for empowering self and creating the conditions for others to also empower themselves in your organization. We are coming to the end of this learning segment now. And Birgit, before we sign off, I'm just wondering if there's anything else you would like to share.
Looking at the subject of empowerment begins with accepting that people empower themselves and that you are not empowering them. And I suggest strongly that, or I encourage you to spend time sitting with that perspective about empowerment until it feels comfortable for yourself, and then proceeding with our other suggestions.
And with that, we're coming to the end of today's segment. As always, please be sure to check out the next video. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you can get all of our episodes delivered right to your inbox.